Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, controversy in the North London Derby, but Harry Kane rescues a point for Tottenham at Wembley. Brendan's back, but why is Leicester's new manager such a divisive figure? And where is the beautiful game heading? Manchester City had 82% possession in their 1-0 victory at Bournemouth yesterday. Taking ownership of the show this morning, Sam Wallace is the chief football writer at the Sunday Telegraph. Melissa's back, and Melissa Reddy is the senior football correspondent at the website Football Joe. And Ian Ladyman is the football editor with The Mail. Morning, good to see you all. Thanks very much for coming in. Bright and early, 8:30 on a Sunday. Don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on screen over the next 90 minutes. OK, let's have a look at what's in the papers. We'll start with The Mail. Big story this. They say Rob Draper says Manchester City facing Euro ban in the Champions League. New Football League's website shows how they got around UEFA rules. We'll come on to Manchester City, all things City, in part 4 of today's programme because they had that 82% possession. Pep's so proud of his players though and their performance. Eddie Howe parking the bus yesterday, 11 men in the box. According to Pep, they did win. City in the end 1-0. So did Manchester United. They won. They beat Southampton 3-2 at Old Trafford. It's a big win, another important win for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. An important story, this one. It's a disturbing story in Sam's paper, The Telegraph. This is Ben Rumsby, police probe. William Mackay, this is the agent who brokered Emiliano Sala's transfer to Cardiff City. He said, according to this story, police probe Mackay amid a kill threat allegation. That's on the front page of the Telegraph this morning, in front of the Sunday Times. They cover the North London Derby, but also this story. This will disturb Newcastle United supporters this morning. Not a great way to start the morning. Newcastle taken off the market by Mike Ashley. This story written by Martin Hardy. That's on the Sun in the Sunday Times this morning, back of the Sun. It's another eye-popping exclusive, apparently. The specs factor, according to the Sun this morning, clubs spy on rivals with £150 glasses. This follows the back of the Leeds United spy storm at the Sun this morning. So the undercover scouts are wearing the £150 glasses fitted with recording devices, sneaking into grounds. What happened to old-fashioned pen and paper? I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that story a little bit later. But the big story yesterday, Sam, was undoubtedly the North London Derby. Started, I think, with some raised eyebrows at the team selection of Unai Emery, which has probably proved spot on ultimately and in the end. But various decisions that I guess we probably need to go through in terms of the story of the day and whether Harry Kane was or wasn't offside or not.
Well, certainly it seems to have divided some of the ex-refereeing community, and one can only go by the expert views that you're given. Those that I've spoken to say that it was the correct decision. Mm-hmm. Offside's a tricky one because if you gave every player on the pitch who was in an offside position as offside, the estimate is that you'd probably disallow about a third of all goals scored. So, for example, a winger cutting the ball back from the byline to a striker is offside when the goal is subsequently scored. So it's all about when a player is actively engaging with the ball, and if you look at the actual wording of the law, it's there on the FA's website. The judgment call for Anthony Taylor was whether, when Mustafi barged Kane was attempting or playing the ball. Now that is obviously a question of interpretation. There is a feeling among the referees community that the law does need to be reworded, that it's unclear. And I believe that the pundit on the spot in the live coverage of the game thought that the decision was wrong. I think a lot of them were watching it with great interest last night, and the feeling that I was given was that actually Taylor was correct. That because at the point where the ball was when Kane was barged by Mustafi, he was not yet actively engaged, and therefore the foul takes precedence over the offside. The distinction, when you're being taught as a referee, is he's in an offside position, but he has not yet committed an offside offence. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference. I thought the Aubameyang penalty in injury.
Sorry, Sam. Just on that point, so we'll just try and deal with them separately if we can. I know it's not easy. It's complicated. Will VAR next season clear a matter like that up? Will it be straightforward?
VAR will definitely look at it. Whether it will clear it up is problem, because I think it's a really fine interpretation, and I think VAR will work well, hopefully, ultimately in lots of situations. But this one, I think, is one where actually the law probably needs to be reworded in order that in order that the situation is clearer, because it was it certainly even divided referees and officials. Yeah. But whether it will clear it up, I think it will still come down to interpretation, and we could well have a referee being, having to look at a screen over and over again next season to try and figure out whether he's right or wrong. Yeah.
Melissa, I know you tried to tweet about this in one single tweet. Not an easy thing to do with everything that went on yesterday. But what was your interpretation of Kane?
I thought he was offside, and he was affecting play because he's not standing in the he's not offside to then admire the ball. He's wanting to, influence play. He's active in the play at that point. It's from a dead ball situation, and I actually think if the linesman has kept up with play, he flags, and that is the point that a lot of referees have made, both past and present. I agree with Sam and the fact that the wording leaves too much to interpretation, which is why you have, if referees can't agree, I don't know, how we're supposed to know, or the players or the managers. It wasn't just the TV referee who on the spot said incorrect decision. I know Chris Foy as well said it was. Keith Hackett said it shouldn't, the goal was correct, or the penalty decision was correct, should have stood. So with all that upheaval, and with it being so unclear for the people we task with making these decisions, how are we helped?
Yeah. Sam says the referees probably want the rules, that particular law tightened up.
The rules around offside are ridiculous, and have become ridiculous over the years that we've all been covering the game, because they've been changed so many times. Football is a very, very simple game, largely, apart from when people start to complicate it with silly rules like this. How are players supposed to understand the rule? How are supporters supposed to understand it if the referees can't understand it? If you look at, if you're a defensive player, you spend a large part of your week doing your defensive drills, offside drills, which take timing and understanding and hard work. And how can you be expected to do them if you know that one of the guys who you're playing offside, with your very well executed kind of move towards the edge of the penalty area at free kick, is actually not going to be offside in a certain situation? It's absolutely ridiculous, and the rule just needs to be simplified. I could probably call up 2 or 3 interpretations of the rule that were better than the current one. It's become too complicated. VAR should solve it, if you presume that the guys who are watching the screens understand the rules. VAR should solve it, but that's not necessarily the point. Do the people playing the game really understand the technicality of that rule yesterday? Probably not. Yep. People watching it certainly don't. It just needs to be simplified. Offside shouldn't be a complicated matter. It didn't used to be.
There's a new phenomenon you saw a little bit yesterday where defensive players, when they're holding quite a high line against a free kick, will push strikers or attacking players into what they consider to be offside positions. And apparently referees will tell you that in the last 18 months that's become a phenomenon. Obviously those players aren't offside until they engage in the play, but I just think it's one of the most the linesmen famously, or assistant referees as we call them now, are asked to be able to judge when the ball is struck, which could be 50 yards away, and still watch the line. I mean, it's a fine art. I think actually it's incredible how many they get right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Given and they get so much stick for the ones they get wrong. But absolutely, a lot of the time they're listening for the ball to be struck, aren't they? Because they have to watch the line.
Just to pick up on what you said there, it's another thing that winds me up. How can a player be in the penalty area, whether you're defending or attacking, and not be influencing play? If you're in the penalty area not influencing play, what are you doing? And it's only certain size. Everyone in the penalty area is influencing play, because if you're an attacker, even if you're not near the ball, one of the defenders and maybe the goalkeeper are watching you because they want to know where you might go. You're influencing play. It's just got bonkers, and it just needs to be simplified, and it won't be.
Can we simplify Arsenal's penalty? Next call.
Didn't think it was a penalty, but I was watching it again. When you watch it on replay over and over again, you're waiting for that really significant contact from Sanchez, and I just don't think it ever came. But it's. I just feel I don't know. I don't. With referees, you wonder what's on you wonder what's on their mind. I think he may well have been thinking about that. I mean, that's only human. He may well have been thinking about that Kane penalty. But it was a dramatic end to the game.
Yeah.
And I think in the end it probably, although Tottenham, given the 2 defeats for that, really needed to win it, it probably felt a little bit more kind of acceptable to them because they'd got a point in such dramatic circumstances.
Finally, so just on Torreira's dismissal as well, and then we'll move on to what this game actually means for both clubs. But Torreira's dismissal.
Yeah, I mean, I think
was that merited?
I think it was a red. I mean, and I think you could see that in the reaction of the players around him. I don't think there was too much kind of, and the managers afterwards. I mean, Emery's, there wasn't too much protest on that front. I think that he was more pleased at how well Arsenal had played, what a kind of solid, competent, defensive, good away performance it had been.
Yeah. Okay. So it ended all square. Melissa, you spent a little bit of time with Mauricio Pochettino, didn't you, at the start of the week? We crave this kind of time and intimacy with managers, and you got that time with Pochettino, and that was after the Burnley defeat and before the Chelsea game, wasn't it? Just talk us through where you think Mauricio Pochettino is with his life in England, his life at Tottenham, his career at Tottenham, and how he feels about the future.
Firstly, it was incredible that the interview, still went ahead because we've all been in the industry long enough to know when things don't go well for a club, and especially when there's such a controversial incident. Obviously the confrontation with Mike Dean. You're thinking you're going to get the call to say the interview's been moved or, we'll revisit it in future. That didn't happen. It went ahead as planned. He approached the subject himself, spoke about the confrontation openly, was very honest about, he felt his behaviour overstepped the mark and how his responsibility as a manager is more important than what he was feeling at the time, and he realised that straight after he'd, got back into the tunnel. Pochettino's done an amazing job at Tottenham. There's obviously the asterisks about the trophy, but when you look at who they've competed against in semi-finals and finals, Chelsea and Man United, those are teams that are stronger than Tottenham, have greater resources than Tottenham. They're not teams you automatically, beat when you're in the hunt for silverware. But what he's done in his 5 years there is made people put Tottenham on that level. Despite everything that people know, their net spend is below £30 million for during his time there. That's staggering. The issue is, and I think he'd be acutely aware of it, is City and Liverpool, who are going for the title this season, will get stronger by virtue of the quality they already have and what they can attract, by the way they play, what they're doing, how they progress in Europe. Tottenham don't have the wage bill to compete with those clubs, and they don't have a strategy that allows them to say, okay, we'll pay an extra £10 million for you to get you in 6 months earlier, like Chelsea, Liverpool, all their rivals do. And I don't see that changing for Tottenham. So how does he continue to exceed expectations under these limitations?
Will he continue with that theory that getting Tottenham to the top four, playing Champions League football, that's seen as sustained success, that there's history there? But how long before it got? Because I thought on Friday it got to Pochettino. I think when he said, if you want to bring a magic man in to win silverware, if Daniel Levy wants to do that, then okay, sack me at the end of the season, because it's just not possible at the moment.
He's sensitive about that, as we know. Understandably sensitive.
He's been
about
sensitive
that.
With you in the past, hasn't he?
He has,
yeah.
And I'm not alone. He's sensitive about that because deep down he knows there's a point there, that there have been opportunities to just take that extra step, not to win the Premier League, but to win a cup. And I personally think that winning domestic cups is undervalued by some managers. I think it's undervalued by Jurgen Klopp, for example. I think it's slightly undervalued by people like Pochettino, who I understand why they make the priorities that they do, but I think he knows that maybe a trophy would answer an awful lot of questions. Just picking up on one thing that Melissa said, and agree with 99% of what you just said. There's one thing about Pochettino that I think he hasn't managed to do, and that is that Tottenham squad is still not deep enough, as we know. It's not deep enough. The first team is an excellent first team. Probably could extend that to maybe the first 12, 13, 14 players. That squad is not deep enough, and that's partly his fault. It's very, very easy for us or for Tottenham supporters to blame everything on Daniel Levy and say, oh, Daniel just won't spend enough money. Pochettino is very, very particular about who he buys, how big the size of his squad is. He's obsessed with having a small squad because he thinks it engenders unity and cohesiveness. He doesn't want players on the fringe who aren't playing, who then might get upset and start to negatively impact on the players who are playing. And that's him. That's not Daniel Levy. Tottenham cannot spend the money that Manchester City spend, correct, but they can spend money, and they have been able to spend money in these last 2 summers when they haven't spent any money. And a lot of that comes down to him. And I think, again, Tottenham have done that thing where they've put in 2 or 3 really good performances and got there, and then immediately they've just gone like that. Part of that, I still think, is down to squad depth, and I think part of that is down to Pochettino. That's a really, really unpopular view, but I believe that's correct.
I think that the manager's comments, though, quite publicly, over a sustained period of time now, would suggest that maybe that was the case when he came in. But, you know, same with Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool. You come in, you look at the landscape, and you understand you've got to change. You go and spend 75 million on, you know, world record fee for a central defender because you have to do that. If you want to challenge for the Premier League, if you want to compete with Manchester City, that's what you've got to do. You go and bring in Alisson for £65 million. So I think Pochettino's thinking has changed. I think he's still been hamstrung by strategy. If you look at some of the players they missed out on, we're not even talking, you know, upper pedigree. We're not talking about the Van Dijks or, you know, De Bruyne level of player. Gini Wijnaldum, who they wanted and Spurs couldn't get because, you know, weren't willing to pay market value and weren't willing to be competitive in terms of wages. And I think that's the issue they have. Also, when they do such little business, there's so many players at Tottenham, I think, who maybe aren't of the required level and should have been let go. So, you know, there's a renewal, there's just a freshness about the squad and greater competition. And I think there's still players there because if you get rid of them, there's a fear that, well, who am I getting to replace them?
But I think part of that is his fault, I think. I think part of that, I firmly believe that part of that is his fault. He's very, very particular about how he does that. And I think that what Tottenham don't lack world-class players. We know that. What they lack is say, I think a really good example is someone like Shaqiri at Liverpool, right? 13 million Shaqiri, right? Liverpool signed him, people thought, he's not going to get in the team. That's not the point. Yeah, he's not going to get in that first team, but he'll get in it when it needs a bit of a freshen and when some player needs a rest, and he'll be on the bench and he'll come off the bench and he'll impact games. That is the type of player. Tottenham need 2 or 3 of those. That's where they failed, and I think Pochettino's got to take a bit of the responsibility for that.
Which players, Sam, do we think have got title-winning quality in the Tottenham squad? Pochettino talked after the Burnley game. He said it's had 5 or 10 years to change the mentality of this football club, to focus and to believe that they can actually go on and win the big titles, Champions League or Premier League. But which players in that Spurs squad have got all the qualities required?
They've got plenty of players. I mean, I know Vertonghen's getting to the end of his career, but if you work through the team, certainly Harry Kane, certainly Dele Alli, I mean, you know, Eriksen, Son. I mean, they've got lots of good players. The thing I remember about Spurs, which is what I think is incredible about Pochettino's achievements, is that they've never been a league-winning club, not one in their history. They've won 2 league titles in their history, the last 51 and 61. I mean, I think Portsmouth have won 2 league titles as well. It's not in the club. They've been a great cup side. The early 80s, when I started watching football, they were a really good cup team, and they've won FA Cups, but they've never had that league pedigree. And I have to say, I mean, when I think back to that sort of period about 10, 12 years ago when it was that hegemony of the top four, it was United, Chelsea, Arsenal and Liverpool, and there used to be a debate. Scudamore used to get asked, when is this ever going to change? This is so dull. Well, City have broken it, and they've broken it because of the Abu Dhabi investment, and Spurs have broken it because of this manager. That I think the thing that I like about him most is he just believes in young British players, and to be honest, I would forgive him a hell of a lot. Just as Wenger was a great developer of talent in his first 10 years, the way that he will. They've got this sort of self-imposed 2-window embargo that they've been through, and I just love the fact that he will bring on Oliver Skipp in the last 10 minutes of a really important game. That he gave Ryan Mason a chance, and it didn't work out for him at Spurs, and obviously it's very sad what happened to his career subsequently. But he tried it, and I really, really admire that. And I think we've had so many managers that have come into this country. And, you know, they've been dubious about the quality of the native talent. He's always tried it, and he's been rewarded. And to be honest, I mean, if there's not, you know, because he hasn't won a League Cup here or there, I could totally forgive that for what he's done for young English players.
Yeah, sure. OK, good stuff, guys. Thanks. Tottenham, of course, still third in the Premier League table after yesterday's 1-1 draw with Arsenal at Wembley. OK, next up, Brendan's back at Leicester. OK, let's talk Brendan now. He's back in English football. He's back with Leicester City. He walked out on Celtic last week after Claude Puel got sacked. Oliver Holt's column in the Mail on Sunday this morning. He backs Rodgers' decision. He showed ambition to leave Celtic. Winning titles in Scotland is like shooting fish in a barrel. That's Ollie's column this morning in the Mail on Sunday. David Walsh, however, in the Sunday Times, got a very, very different take on Rodgers' decision. Cold-hearted opportunism trumped sentimental talk of a boyhood allegiance for Rodgers. Rodgers, of course, made a lot of store by his boyhood allegiance to Celtic, and of course his family as well, steeped in the club as well. Melissa, was this rampant opportunism by Rodgers, or is this just a sign of his ambition?
I think he's admitted himself that the timing, you know, was unfortunate, that he would have loved to have rather left the job in the summer, but he seemed to hint that it was take it or leave it. This happens now or we move on to other targets, which is quite interesting because when you think back to, you know, when FSG were speaking about him and with regards to the Liverpool job, he was very firm then and said, nope, not doing interviews and stuff. I'm either your man or I'm not. And I think that shows, you know, growth, but also how the landscape has shifted in terms of how he's perceived. It is a very good job, Leicester. I think they're a good club. They've got infrastructure that they're working towards. They're very ambitious, very good balance in the squad. So I can see why he's looked at it and thought the possibilities there. I mean, you know, coupled with his experience, and he's quite a good coach in terms of the technical side of things. He's a good manager. I think what lets him down, two key things: being collaborative. He didn't really display that at Liverpool. It was, you know, who he wanted in the transfer market, his decisions. I think elite managers are able to take expert opinions and accept it from, you know, people around the club, their heads of departments and stuff. You see that with Klopp, with Pochettino, with Guardiola. And also they surround themselves with strong people who question them and, you know, just challenge their way of thinking. I don't see that with Brendan. I think he's a very strong character on his own and he believes in what he believes in, and that's it. The other thing is he tends to, he does lots of great stuff, Brendan. When managers are out of work, he invites them in, you know, his door is always open. He's helped managers like Eddie Howe, given them guidance. But then he talks about it too much, or, you know, he lets himself down a bit. And I think that's why he's such a decisive figure. But technically, in terms of his ability to understand tactics, to work on the strengths of a team, to make them better than the sum of their parts. He's really good at that. And his time at Liverpool, a lot of people say without Luis Suarez, you know, there would be no title challenge. But if you listen to the players, Raheem Sterling, Gerrard, Henderson, about what he changed in their games and also how he helped them off the field, you'd know that he is a good coach. It's just, I think, the only hindrance to how good a manager he can be is himself.
What I don't understand, Ian, is this is a guy, for me, a guy who committed his life, his coaching career, to mastering the art of management. But on Tuesday night, Hearts played Celtic, Neil Lennon is in charge, and a banner is unfurled by Celtic supporters. And one of the phrases was, "Never a Celt, always a fraud." Why do people say that about Brendan Rodgers? It's not the only word that's used to describe him. I've seen imposter.
I think there are about four points I'd like to make on Brendan. I'm
Yeah.
clearly going to forget two of them, but I'll try and make half of the ones I want to make.
Okay. Sam's here as well.
I
I'll try
appreciate
and make
that,
the
and I
other
know
two
we've only
that
got,
you
only got a certain amount of time. Right. Cold-hearted opportunism. Well, what's wrong with being opportunistic in football? If you're not opportunistic in football, you'll probably get left behind. For first thing, it's great to have Brendan back in the Premier League. For us, selfishly, I think he plays a very watchable brand of football, and he's very quotable for us and accessible. Also, you know, we like all those things. He's a good coach. Good coaches improve players. You just touched on it there. Some of those players, Sterling, he definitely improved. Henderson, 100% improved. His confidence was low before Brendan arrived. And so why would he not take this opportunity? This is a guy who almost won the league for Liverpool and was out of work 18 months later. He knows how it goes in football. He knows how it goes. He knows how disposable you are very, very quickly, despite what you may have achieved previously. So I don't think that anyone can say that Brendan Rodgers hasn't achieved at Celtic. I don't think people can say he doesn't leave Celtic in a good place. Of course, he was eventually going to grow stale at Celtic because the challenge doesn't change in Scotland, despite the fact that Rangers are now on the horizon again. So why would he not leave? Finally, just to go
Is this still point one?
To your point, this is now point 9.
Oh.
Just to get to the question about why is he getting so much criticism, I think this is
is he a fraud?
The nub of it is that Brendan is great for us because he talks, and he's one of the most brilliantly quotable managers out there. But he can talk himself into problems from his point of view. And if I was his agent, I would probably just have that chat with him. I was at his first press conference when he came to Liverpool, right? When he came to Liverpool from Swansea. Liverpool were kind of in a trough, weren't they? Because Hodgson hadn't worked and Dalglish hadn't worked. There seemed to be any direction. He arrived, he walked in, he sat down, he said, right, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to do. And he very much came across as a man with a plan, and that was great to see, because no one had a plan at Liverpool for quite a while. But he told this story about sitting on his grandfather's living room floor watching a great Liverpool Cup final of yore. I can't remember which one it was, but I presume, given that he's 46, it was probably one of the back early 80s, I presume. He told this story, and he very much, this is me. I'm kind of Liverpool through and through. This is my background. This is why I'm here. And he goes to Celtic, and he says the same stuff, similar stuff up there. And he lets people believe that he's...
So he's the Robbie Keane of football management.
He lets people believe that he's hefted to Celtic emotionally as well. And that works brilliantly until he decides you want to go. And then, it's great while you're there, because everyone thinks, oh, he's one of us, it's brilliant. And then all of a sudden, it becomes clear that, well, actually, he's another football manager who wants to do great things for himself. And as soon as he's done what he wants to do and you're no longer of use to him, he'll go.
I just don't see the debate. I can see why Scottish football's so upset about, because he's box office, he's a big name, he's been Liverpool manager, but they surely must realise that, no one's won a league title outside of the old firm since Fergie, have they? It's Virgil van Dijk's not still playing in Scotland. Stuart Armstrong's not still playing in Scotland. The players all leave, so why is it any different for the managers? And I think Brendan is he's a natural storyteller, isn't he? He wants to.
Brilliant.
And he's got a command of the language. He can speak, And I remember someone saying about him, oh, Brendan Rodgers, he's just an actor. Well, you need to be as a football manager. You're on telly every day. You know, you're on telly more than a lot of actors are. So you need to be able to deliver something. I just thought the thing that really painted him into a corner was that ridiculous documentary when being Liverpool, which, you know, in hindsight, just he walked straight into it. It was being filmed almost pre-season when he arrived at the club. And it's very hard not to come across, whoever you are, not to come across a bit David Brent in those situations, because they're in your car, they're in your office, and it wasn't. It was meant to be a kind of hagiography. It wasn't a critical documentary. Those ones, it's not like the great Graham Taylor documentary where it's sort of warts and all. But in trying to polish up this picture of the club and everything, it came across as a bit false, I thought, and I felt he was a bit of a victim of that, really. And I think, you know, he was still a very young manager then, and I think he's older and wiser now. And if Leicester said, "Oh, by the way, Brendan, we've got a documentary crew coming in," he'd say, "Actually, I think that's not for me." So, you know, you live and learn, and I think he is, you know, he's a good coach. He does improve players.
Don't you think it's fascinating now, Sam, that this will tell us what we need to know about Brendan, don't you think? Because the questions that you mentioned earlier about some people saying, oh, he only did what he did with Liverpool because of Luis Suarez, and then people say, oh, well, he only won, as Ollie said today, you know, winning titles in Celtic is like, in Scotland is like shooting fish in a barrel. So this is his definitive moment, isn't it? When we find out now how good Brendan Rodgers is, whether he can take Leicester to Europe, as he's already said he wants to do, or whether Leicester just remain kind of a middling Premier League club. I think it'll be fascinating to watch, and it'll be fascinating to learn whether he's as good as coach as we all actually think that he is.
He goes back to one of his former clubs today, his first club, in fact, Watford, with his new Leicester side. When he goes back to Liverpool, what kind of reaction, what kind of reception will he get? How is he remembered as a Liverpool manager? There
is still, you know, we use the word divisive, and it's still the same. There are a lot of people who will say 2013-14 was so exhilarating, some of the best football, some of the best enjoyment they've got from being in the stadium or from being involved with the club. At the same time, you'll have people picking up on his faults, and a lot of those are not football related, which, you know, to my opinion, doesn't even enter the equation, those kind of things. And the reason, I think, is the two you mentioned, the documentary that he walked into, but also he talks himself into trouble. He said he comes back to the Premier League a better manager. And I really hope that's the case. I hope he's learned from his own shortcomings, you know, just be collaborative, understand you're a part of a whole, that whole, you know, the manager being the overarching figure, the Alex Ferguson type manager doesn't really work anymore in modern football. You know, your sporting director is so important, your scouting department, you know, medical, all those kind of things. I really want him to be successful because I think he's been an inspiration to a lot of young managers, especially a lot of young English managers. He's been very good for a lot of young English players. And for a while he was, you know, linked and spoken about with the England national team job. And that's actually something I can see in the future. So yeah, I hope he does well. What kind of reception he gets, it will be really interesting to see in the actual stadium, because I think Anfield might be more appreciative than, you know, the wider Liverpool audience, like the things you get on Twitter and that kind of stuff.
The match-going fan is very different, isn't it, to the fan that you encounter?
Need to touch on Scott Parker because he's just taken over from Claudio Ranieri. Sam, you've written about this situation in your column this morning. Ranieri this was an obvious mistake by Fulham, was it? And
yeah, it wasn't.
They've made a very quick. I mean, he's been in the job for what, three months, and he's been replaced by his assistant manager.
Yeah, I mean, that's a failure, isn't it? It wasn't after 9 games. They got 8 points from the first 9 games. So the club feel that 9th game they beat Huddersfield, Mawson got injured, the business started with Kamara over the penalty, and then that escalated. He ended up being arrested at the training ground, and they felt that was the moment that he needed to change. So Jokanovic had been way too expensive, Ranieri had been tightened up at the back, gone direct, and I think he got 3 points from the second 9 games and then got sacked. So the point about Fulham is that Tony Khan, who's the chairman and director of football operations, the son of the vice chairman, sorry, the son of the owner, he's not going to change. Like his recruitment model is data driven. I mean, Brian Talbot does the scouting. Any manager who wants to be at Fulham in the long term is going to have to collaborate with that. Jokanovic did not, and there were good reasons at times for some of the personnel at the club. One individual in particular who he found objectionable. So whether Scott Parker would have seen the club from the inside. He would have seen all this. I presume he knows that this is the case. I think there is a bit of resignation that he may well be getting relegated. If he's going to be there in the long term, he's going to have to make this model work for him.
Yeah. Okay. Good luck to Scott Parker in his caretaker role at Fulham. He might get the job full-time eventually. We'll talk about another caretaker manager next. That's Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Another win for him yesterday as Manchester United manager, this time a late one against Southampton. Welcome back. With us this morning, Sam Wallace, Melissa Reddy and Ian Ladyman. Let's just remind you what's in making the papers this morning. It's the front page of The Observer. Hugs for Hugo. Draw yesterday for Tottenham. We've already talked about that result, the performance and the controversy in part one of today's programme. We'll come on to Manchester City in part four. Pep is so proud of his players. 82% possession yesterday in their 1-0 victory at Bournemouth. The Sunday Telegraph, police probing Willie Mackay amid a kill threat allegation. This is in the Telegraph this morning. Willie Mackay was the agent, of course, who brokered the transfer for Emiliano Sala from Nantes to Cardiff. We've just been talking about Brendan Rodgers, a divisive figure. We know which side Ollie Holt's on. Rodgers showed ambition when he decided to leave Celtic. David Walsh's column calls him an opportunist after his decision to leave Celtic last week to become the new Leicester manager. Of course, Leicester in action at Watford, Brendan Rodgers' first club, at lunchtime today. Sunday Express, Ollie's luck. It's in. It's definitely another win. Big win for him yesterday against Southampton because of the circumstances. But why haven't they given him the job yet? Why hasn't it been confirmed, Ian?
I don't know why they haven't given him the job yet, sadly. I was thinking about this morning.
Helpful.
That wasn't that difficult to work out that we might talk about it. And for once in my life, I find it difficult to even know what I think about this because it's such a weird situation that a guy comes. There can't have been a more short-term caretaker appointment in football than this one. It was okay. We know why they brought him in because he's who he is, but he hasn't really got a pedigree in English football of management. His time at Cardiff was a disaster. So this is what it is. He'll jog things along for a few weeks, a few months, and then he'll go. And then you have a situation now where watching the highlights last night on the TV, despite the fact they only won by 1 goal, it's Manchester United again. They create chances again, and lots of them all the time, which you can't actually say that about a Manchester United team going back 3 managers now, because none of the previous 3 managers played like that. So he has done this, an incredible thing, and that's a big term, but it's true. It has been an incredible turnaround. But do you give him the job? I guess they do give him the job, but I would say it probably depends on how far they got with Pochettino, and I'm not sure that there's any of us really out there who really know how far they've got with Pochettino. If they're in a situation where Pochettino has said to them, "Don't worry, guys. Doesn't matter what Daniel says. I'm your man. I'm coming. I'll just walk out on my contract if I have to." If, for example, hypothetically, that was the state of play, given what we've all been saying about Pochettino in the last half an hour, how can you turn that down? How can you turn that down without repeating what we've said about him? No, if it isn't that situation, if it was a situation whereby thinking, well, we want Mauricio, but hell, that's going to be a hell of a scrap with Daniel Levy. We've tried, getting players out of Tottenham over the years has been hard enough without getting a manager. If they're in that situation, now they've got this incredible alternative, then it would be quite startling if they didn't take the alternative. And they'll just have to hope that Solskjaer proves himself equally adept at doing all the other parts of the manager's job, apart from, what he's done so far. They just have to hope that he can do that, because there is no evidence that he can do that. There was no evidence of that at Cardiff. But you talk to people at Cardiff about what he was like at Cardiff, and he was worse than poor. at Cardiff. He really was. He showed nothing of what he's shown back at Old Trafford.
Better support team here, as he's got Mike Phelan alongside him. He's got
Yeah.
Michael Carrick alongside him. I think those are important, probably important members of his backroom staff here. So in terms of support.
And that's the other thing as well. If they were to try and go, if they decide they don't want him, they don't just lose him, they'll lose them as well.
They can't sack Mike Phelan again. I think he's got a job for life.
They sacked your man, Jose Mourinho. You sat down with him last Sunday, didn't you? How did that come about, Sam? And what sort of mood? How is the Mourinho, the 2019 Mourinho, shaping up?
You won't be surprised to know he's not lost any of his sort of self-confidence despite what happened at United. There are, I mean, you can see from the other sort of public statements he's made, there are certain limitations on what he can't. They can't talk about United because of the agreement between him and the club, and it's pretty common. But I think always with Jose, it is a bit of a read between the lines exercise. So he was very clear about what he wants from his next club. He's even created a phrase, structural empathy is what he says, and what he basically means is he wants everybody to work together and to work collectively, and for there to be a kind of not 500 scouts that I've never met, as he said, but 5 scouts that I know well. So I think perhaps you can infer from the way that he's looking at the future how he regards the past, and. He also said that he would be prepared. Ever since he left Porto, he's only really worked for the top clubs. I mean, even Inter Milan were kind of at the top of the pile in Italy because of the Calciopoli scandal at the time. So he did say that he would be prepared to work for a club that, as long as they had ambition and that he could see himself winning trophies in the future, that he would be prepared to take that challenge on. I noticed that last night the Real Madrid fans outside the ground were singing his name, so I presume that's an option.
After yet another defeat, yeah.
I think you have to bear in mind that these guys are not, for all the kind of sort of however beleaguered he may have looked come the end of his time at United, they don't lack for confidence. And the one thing that I was pretty sure about was that although he'd spent a lot of time reflecting, he said, on everything he'd done at United, he considers himself 25 major honours, because they include all the community shields and stuff. He still believes that Jose Mourinho is the man who will go on. He will go on to win more cups, and he's not feeling too deflated, put it that way.
I like that idea of him working collectively. I really want us all to work collectively, as long as everybody at the end of the day agrees with me.
I should have borrowed Melissa as well. I like collaboration, the collaborative effort.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think you nailed it there.
Just finally, Sam, I'm always intrigued by his relationship with the media. How did you find in terms of? Did you talk to him about that? Because it's quite volatile at times. Was it quite combustible? Ian will have experienced it at Manchester United more recently. But did you talk about that?
No, we didn't talk about it directly. I mean. The interview came about for a mutual acquaintance. I don't think he takes too much of that. It's a game for him. It's all part of strategy, and I don't think he takes any of it too personally.
No, sure. OK. Let's move on to Chelsea. We've got lots to get through this morning. Last Sunday, it was last Sunday, Carabao Cup final. The incident with Kepa, Willy Caballero, Maurizio Sarri on the sidelines. Then, of course, Willy Caballero plays against Tottenham on Wednesday night at Stamford Bridge. How did Sarri and how did Chelsea and how did the respective individuals, how did they deal with it? Could it have been any different? Could it have worked out any differently? Or is this the best they could have hoped for?
Yeah, I think the incident itself was absolutely shocking in terms of Sarri. I think he came out of it the worst because as a manager, your authority is gold. You have to have respect. And, OK, with Kepa insisting he's not coming off, you make sure he comes off. You are the manager. So when he turns his back and when, Zola has to go in and try and influence matters and he storms off, storms off, it looks like he had absolutely zero control of that situation, which is a bad thing. On Kepa's side, for a young player and a new player who's not even, who's only just signed for the club, to feel so emboldened to act like that, to be so openly disrespectful, there can be no arguments that you feel that way, because there is a culture at the club that says you can act that way. I think how they handle it since, the fact that, Kepa's apologised publicly, that he's been fined, that he was dropped, is good, because it's then getting some of that authority back for Sarri. But long term, Chelsea are just all over the place, because they've got a strategy that is absolutely at odds with the manager they've brought in. They are all about win now, win quickly, win no matter the cost. And he is all about process, time, building. And even if you don't win anything, if you're doing it in the right way, that's great, that's success. Then, they've got the transfer ban. They've got so many players whose futures are uncertain, whose contracts are running out. They need to, if they're keeping Sarri, they need to shape that squad in his image. If not, they have to find a manager who they're willing to get in long term, because their policy of short-termism, I don't think it works anymore. In the age of Guardiola, of Klopp, of Pochettino, with Emery, in the derby, the way Arsenal played without the ball was incredible. That showed a side to them that I think we need to see more of, and that he's capable of doing that while also playing an attacking brand of football, I think bodes well for Arsenal. In the age of these process managers, I don't think Chelsea can continuously bring a guy in, win a trophy, and get shots of him. It's not going to work anymore.
Yeah, sure. OK, we'll see how Sarri gets on this afternoon, because, of course, Chelsea have got a London derby. They play Fulham. Scott Parker's first game as caretaker manager. OK, next up, we're going to talk about Manchester City. 82% possession for them yesterday in their 1-0 victory at Bournemouth. More on that next. Welcome back. Little date for your diary tomorrow evening. A programme special on Sky Sports News, which is tackling racism. I'll be alongside Paul McCarthy, former sports editor at the News of the World, Vishali Bhardwaj, regular on the Sunday Supplement. I'll be on that programme. That's from 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. A date for your diary this morning, though. Of course, Goals on Sunday follows us as usual with Ben and Cammy. Let's find out what the boys are up to. Ben.
Morning, Neil. Morning,
Good
everybody. I hope you're having a good morning so far.
I'm sure they are.
Great guest joining us this morning, haven't we, Cammy?
We have indeed. Gustavo Poyet, Chelsea legend, and managed a few clubs as well.
Yeah, more recently, of course, he's been in France, he's been to China, so it's going to be really interesting to get his thoughts on those things. And we'll be looking ahead, as I'm sure you guys are as well, to the Merseyside Derby. We're going to have a cross with Jamie Carragher. It'll be interesting to see exactly where the points are going to go there, won't it?
Very much so. And City winning yesterday.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting show. We'll see you a little bit later on at about 10 o'clock.
Yeah, thanks, boys. We'll talk Merseyside Derby in part 5 of today's programme. Part 4, though, Man City. Ian, you were there yesterday to see them beat Bournemouth. Remarkable statistics, though. 82% possession. That was the most probably jaw-dropping, but there were other statistics in terms of number of shots or number of chances created by Bournemouth shots. There were zeros in every single column, wasn't there?
Yeah, zero corners.
And I know you've probably got some of your own thoughts on the game, and I wasn't there. But when I saw the 82% headline statistic of an away game of a team dominating like that in English football in the Premier League, I thought, well, hold on a minute. That's not normal.
It's becoming normal, or it's becoming close to normal. It's funny, it's like when you try to decide which game you're going to do at the weekend. I mean, there's some games that, like this afternoon's game, that are so big that obviously you're going to go to that. But then there are others that you think, oh, well, that could be interesting, and that might be a story. And I looked at that one yesterday and thought, well, I was at Bournemouth earlier this season when they played Arsenal. They gave Arsenal a good run for their money. And, OK, let's see. You never know. You never know. City have a slight off day and Bournemouth get at it. Could be a shock there. So you go. And then 5 or 10 minutes into the game, you just realise that is not going to happen because of the way that the two teams are going about the game. You don't want to sit here and criticise Bournemouth and criticise Eddie. They've lost 1-0. It's a perfectly creditable result. But you can't get away from the fact that as a neutral, you sit at that game and it's very hard to engage in with what you're watching, because it's not really a contest. It's just one team playing with the ball and intent on scoring goals, and the other one trying to stop them and then hoping that maybe something might just happen for them at the other end of the field. So, two things to say. Bournemouth aren't the only team to do it. So I think the most memorable, for the wrong reasons, experience was last season at Newcastle, when Newcastle did it, and I think also lost 1-0. against City, and that was quite depressing to watch at St James's Park. To be at St James's Park and it was so becalmed because there were no tackles, no fouls, no pressing, no running, no nothing, just a resignation to eventual defeat. And secondly, that I do think that part of this, City have done this to teams. It's not over the past 2 or 3 years. It's not just that managers and coaches have woken up one morning and thought this is how we're going to play against Manchester City. City's excellence in the last 2 or 3 seasons, particularly last season, has worn other managers and other teams down. It has pushed them towards this mental and psychological acceptance that they can't be beaten, and therefore the best approach is damage limitation. It's better to lose 1-0 at home than to lose 5-2 at home and really give everyone a spectacle.
I mean, a couple of things here.
That is where we are, and it is a shame because you go to games that aren't contests, but I can kind of understand why we have reached this point.
I mean, Palace won at the Etihad early in the season, not the only team to beat Manchester City, but the other point that I'd like to make, incidentally, Bournemouth, apparently the first Premier League team in history not to register a single shot in a home match yesterday.
It would have actually...
But you've got, sorry, Miss, just to finish that point, was this Bournemouth have got players on 60, 70, 80,000 pounds a week, and yet they're approaching the game to try to nullify Manchester City without a great deal of ambition, a sense of adventure. They're not being liberated. They're being told by one of the coaches that we like, that everybody likes on this. I think everyone likes and respects on this table. But they were told it seems to me the game plan yesterday was very much.
But they've just come. I mean, they've just come off. What was it? 5-1 at Arsenal.
Yeah.
They've just come off 5-1 at Arsenal. They're not in great. If this had been a Bournemouth team that was in a real rich vein, they might have thought, right, come on, we've just won our last 2 games. Let's have a go at this one. If we lose, we lose. I think Eddie was probably thinking, we need to try and nick a 0-0 here if we can and get something.
Yeah, it would have actually been hard for Eddie Howe to think we have to be obstructive because it's not in his nature. He's a brave manager, you know, despite Bournemouth being a smaller club, smaller resources and all that stuff. They don't have that mentality. But given the context of the situation, they've been leaking goals and he will know what the state of the team is, whether they'd be able to press City for an entire game.
Newport County gave them a proper game on their own pitch, a terrible pitch.
Yeah.
But I just don't see why they would concede so much to a team that they're not unbeatable, they're not superhuman, and if it's a cup game, they approach it completely differently. I'm sure.
But some clubs don't they? Some managers actually don't know if Eddie's one of them. Sean Dyche, for example, will look at the league table at the start of the season. I think Roy Hodgson's the same, and think, right, we need to make sure that we get points off these teams, i.e. the teams that are likely to be around us. When we play them, we need to get teams off them and try and beat them. And if we lose to all the rest, the big teams, it doesn't matter.
Bournemouth have done well against big teams in the past. They've played well. You know, they've beaten Liverpool, they've beaten Chelsea. I think they've beaten City as well. I think the situation they're in at the moment, where they've been so easy and so soft, and teams are finding it so easy to breach them, meant that they looked at it and thought it could be an absolute hiding if we carry any of that into this game against City. I do think, though, they will have been hugely disappointed that they couldn't match that defensive diligence with anything at the other end of the pitch. There should have been some idea to, you know, counter or long ball over the top, use your pace out wide to sort of rattle Man City, because it is mentally draining when you're playing such an obstructive team to create chances. The frustration creeps in because it's so hard to find the spaces. So, you know, when you tire out City, you then think, okay, here's the time to hit them, but they just never had any of that.
The sad thing, I think, is that we're getting used to it. I remember I was at the Newcastle game last Christmas before, and I was shocked by it. And I think wrote that I was shocked by it, by the fact that they hadn't really tried to engage at home against City. And then yesterday, I wasn't shocked by it. And I think maybe it just shows that even in our minds, or in my mind, we've become a little bit accepting, and that's a shame, because it shouldn't be that way, really.
Worrying trend for English football. A worrying story on the back page of the Mail on Sunday this morning, Sam. Why are you looking at me like? I know why you're looking at me like that. City face Euroban. New leaks show how they got around UEFA rules. This is Rob Draper. This story, and it comes back time and time again, doesn't it, about Manchester City? Are we in a position in the media where we're not quite sure exactly how we should be handling this story? Because this is the only paper that's given it
that
due prominence. Yeah.
Well, part of the problem is that Der Spiegel, who are doing all the stories and doing a pretty solid job of it, they have the documents, so no one else has access to them. So any lawyer of a newspaper is going to say, well, where's this from? I mean, what happens if we get challenged, if we get an ipso complaint? Where's our evidence? We don't have it. So although they have published some of these documents, again, there's inevitably questions about the provenance of them. I think it's been a really interesting investigation. Manchester City have not changed their stance. They've not engaged with it at all. So their statement is that these materials are hacked and stolen and are an attempt to smear the club. And that has been the same since the Football League / Der Spiegel investigation began. I don't know at what point City decide that they have to start explaining this. I rather think they're hoping it will go away. Yeah. It doesn't seem to be going away.
How do we feel about newspapers publishing hacked or stolen documents?
Well, I think it's a public interest debate, and if rules are being broken, then I think there's absolutely a case to do it. And Der Spiegel, they are a serious newspaper, and they pick their targets very carefully, and they've obviously put a lot of work into them. I mean, I've read them all. Just to praise the most recent ones, they have more documents alleging that Manchester City's sponsorship deals were artificially inflated to give them cash that passed the FFP laws. There is a very complicated story about officials at the club establishing an investment company that wanted to get into third-party ownership. These are all allegations, as we have to add, as we would if we were writing about it. But what interests me is City's position. When are they going to engage with these questions, and are they waiting for UEFA to make a decision? And are UEFA ever going to make a decision on this? Because it is really complicated and the picture is changing all the time.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Heavy going stuff. Hopefully we'll get to talk about Manchester City and FFP and UEFA in another programme. I'll let you get back to some easier stuff on about Page of the Suns. I know you like that story.
I want a pair of these glasses.
Yeah, we'll get you some. They're only 150 quid. We'll start a whip round. OK, next up, we're going to talk about it's the World Cup final, isn't it? It's the Merseyside Derby, Liverpool at Everton this afternoon. More on that next. Let's talk the Merseyside Derby now, Melissa. Huge game as ever. But there's a little bit of needle developing here, isn't there, between the two clubs? And I think that's probably because of the injury time when it was celebrated so wildly by Jurgen Klopp at Anfield last year. Where do these two clubs stand with each other at the moment?
Everton are obviously still annoyed because they played quite well in that game, and given their recent history in Merseyside derbies, which they don't have a great record or even a good record. In fact, it's incredibly poor. I think there is an aggression about them that we'll see at Goodison today, based off, they probably watched that goal and the celebrations to that goal to amp themselves up for this encounter. But if Liverpool play anywhere close to what they did against Watford, just forget the scoreline. I think since the turn of the year, there's been concerns. A lot of the talk is centered around pressure, but for me it was the technical elements of Liverpool's game, the things that you characterize them with, that was missing, and that's application. I don't think it was mental. Against Watford, you saw all of that come back: movement, speed, not just in terms of how quickly they played the ball, but speed of thought, invention, offensive protection. Scoring from set pieces again, and Everton have been really poor at set pieces. So, that's something that Liverpool can look to exploit today. If Liverpool continue that against Everton and towards the rest of the season, those characteristics, I'm not saying, go and score 5 goals every game, but if they keep that rhythm that they showed, I think their destiny is decided. Goodison derbies are never nice occasions or enjoyable occasions. But I think Liverpool will really relish the fact that all this talk about pressure is centred on them, and this is obviously a game to highlight that. I think they'll want to put that to bed.
They're second in the table now because of City's win yesterday. Will that unnerve them at all? Because the Mail published a piece across the top of Adam Crafton's match report today, which shows you where the respective teams were at different stages of the season, and the moment when Liverpool were 7 points clear of Manchester City's highlighted, among other various points of the season. Will that unnerve them? Will that unnerve Liverpool at all, that they are now chasing, and only by virtue of the fact that Man City played yesterday and obviously Liverpool played this afternoon?
I'm not sure whether it unnerves them, but I think it undoubtedly has an effect, especially when you contrast that to how City will probably be feeling. I said to Guardiola after yesterday's game, he spoke for a long time yesterday, Guardiola, after the game, which is not particularly usual for him. He was very relaxed, very, very happy, so happy about the win. But I asked him, are you stressed by the competition, by the pressure of the title race? He was like, no, not stressed. We've done it before. We know we got 100 points. 100 points. We've got trophies already. We're not stressed. We're enjoying it. So obviously the next obvious question is, do you think they're stressed? Do you think Liverpool are stressed? I don't know about that. And I said, well, they must be, because, answering my own question, because they haven't won it for so long. And I think you only have to be human to feel that, I think, whether you're a Klopp looking for your first trophy in this country, or Liverpool carrying this enormous burden of expectation and historical pressure. So I'm not sure they'll be unnerved by it, but I think if you were to take the two teams, the two clubs, the two sets of players, and ask who is likely to deal with this the better in the next 2 or 3 months, you'd have to say Manchester City.
But if I take it back to, say, a Leicester example, so the team that had never won the Premier League, and everyone said, well, you obviously can't win it because, well, you're Leicester City, you don't have the players to do it, you don't have the experience, to last the distance of a 38 Premier League game season. But they confounded everyone. They did go and do it. So it's a different history.
No pressure, though.
No pressure with Leicester.
Zero pressure. Everything was a win. Everything was a win. A glorious second would have been a glorious second. A third would have been the Champions League. No pressure. So much pressure at Liverpool. Klopp's referenced it himself. He even talks about how he can see it in the eyes of journalists up there, how much some of the guys who work for the local papers, how much they want it. He knows, he's referenced it himself.
So how does he manage that, Sam? Or should he? Or should he, everyone gets swept away with 2014 with Brent, was it 2014 back then?
Yeah.
Everyone was swept away, the euphoria, the hysteria.
To be fair to Brendan, he never was. I mean, there were lots of attempts, I'm sure we all did, to try and get him to say something grandiose about history and the hand of history on his shoulder or any of that, that sort of nonsense that newspapers love. But he never did, and I felt he was pretty self-contained about it. Klopp is very, I don't cover Liverpool as much as Melissa does, but he seems to be very irreverent. He's funny. I mean, he makes a lot of jokes at the expense of journalists, which other journalists love. So he has won 2 league titles against arguably an even more dominant force in Germany and Bayern Munich than the modern day City. So I don't kind of get the impression that he's a man who's hanging his professional reputation on winning or losing the title this season. I think he's pretty well established. He's pretty comfortable in his own skin. He doesn't strike me as a manager under pressure. I think what might be trying to 2 steps ahead is what kind of Liverpool emerges from this season if they don't win it, because it will then be 29 years, which just blows my mind. Because when United went 27 years, and that 67 to 93, that felt like a different age, and I guess it does for young people now. They must look back and think, the 1990s just another era. So. That's what I wonder. How do they keep the momentum? How do they sort of gather their resources and to quote Steven Gerrard, go again next season if it doesn't work out this season?
They've done incredibly well, haven't they? they were 25 points behind Manchester City at the end of last season. To even make up half of that gap would have been an achievement. They have done incredibly well, but will that mean anything if they can't just do the final furlong?
People look, Melissa, we're always looking for chinks in the armoury. And one of them, people have been writing about Mo Salah, but he's still got his goals. He's still influential in terms of the number of times that he puts the ball in the back of the net. But has his form dropped off at all from the player that we witnessed last season?
I think Liverpool's front three as a whole, you know, as I said from the turn of the year, Liverpool's form or Liverpool weren't typically themselves, and that's not to say again that you expect them to be this attacking juggernaut all the time, but just things that are traits of their play, you know, high chance creation, all that was missing, and obviously that affected him as well as others. But Mo Salah's all-round game is actually better this season than it was last. Obviously, the staggering number of goals, you know, got all the headlines. He's a better team player this season, less selfish. You know, selfish was good because he was getting all the goals, but I think he's doing more of what the team require him to do. He didn't get a goal at Watford, but he was absolutely unplayable. Liverpool were so dominant because of him and Trent Alexander's combination play largely on that right-hand side. Yeah. Going back to this point about pressure and expectation, obviously the expectation from, you know, the fan base, the press, from everyone is so great. But when you look at the players, yeah, there's no real, you know, long title-winning history. But there are players there that have fought against relegation, and that is actual pressure. That's when people are losing jobs, or your salary's getting halved, or you're not certain if you're going to have a club next season. And I think there's a lot of players, and Andy Robertson was one who spoke about it, Gini Wijnaldum's been another. You enjoy being at that top end of the conversation. Yes, you know, there's a massive burden on you to go out and be your best every single time, but it's better than being there at the bottom where there's so much uncertainty. You know what you have to do when you're at the top. You're happy to be there. And I think Liverpool really have to embrace it and enjoy it. And I think people at the club are. Externally, the fan base needs to as well.
They've really missed Joe Gomez, by the way, haven't they?
Yeah.
Really missed Joe Gomez. I mean, the two disappointing results they had recently, apart from one at Old Trafford, the draw against Leicester at home and the draw at West Ham, they were both poor goals. They have conceded some poor goals since Joe got injured, because Lovren and Matip are just not quite at that level of partner for Van Dijk.
OK, we've run out of time, unfortunately, Ian. But thanks very much to Sam, to Melissa and to Ian for their company this morning. We'll see him again very soon.